Hi everybody, Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, and today's contract tip is a continuation of the series on the 2021 changes to the Georgia Association of Realtors contract forms. So I want to continue on with another new form and love to hear your comments if you like it or not. This form is it is GAR, Georgia Association of Realtors, Form F302, the Seller's Disclosure of Latent Defects and Fixtures Checklist Exhibit. That's a mouthful. So let me back up a little bit and tell you why this form came about and what it's all about. So in Georgia, the law is that a seller is required to disclose latent material defects of which the seller has knowledge. And that is from law. It is Title 51, Chapter 6. It's under the tort section of our Georgia Code. So it's Title 51, Chapter 6, Section 2, which talks about misrepresentation of material fact as an actionable tort offense. And it's more than concealment. It is knowledge of falsehood essential to deceit when knowledge is implied. When misrepresentation of material fact, actionable as deceit, effect of mere concealment, knowledge of falsehood, basically, if that is done, it becomes an actionable offense as a tort. In other words, a seller is required to disclose to any buyer latent material defects of which the seller has knowledge. That's even if a seller is selling the property as is. Selling the property as is just means the seller does not intend on doing any repairs to the property. Selling a property as is does not alleviate a seller's legal obligation to disclose latent material defects. So GAR already has a form that they change periodically throughout the years, and this form is the seller's property disclosure form, which is the GAR 301, Seller's Property Disclosure Statement Exhibit. And it even says in this form that this statement is intended to make it easier for a seller to fulfill the seller's legal duty to disclose hidden defects in a property of which the seller is aware. The seller is obligated to disclose such defects even when the property is being sold as is. So that form has been in existence, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. It is a 7-page form, and the last part of this form also has a checklist of the fixtures and personal property items that the seller is removing from the property. So the issue came into play that we had a lot of sellers, a lot of investors, a lot of estates, a lot of foreclosures or properties owned by LLCs where the seller on title never lived in the property and never wanted to complete that disclosure form. And so they never completed it. Again, a lot of times investors would never complete that form, yet the investor we know went through the house fixing stuff that was a defect in order to renovate it and typically flip it and put it back on the market. So, sometimes there are investors that knew more about their houses than actual owner occupants. But nevertheless, they never wanted to fill out that form. So this year in 2021, GAR has come up with a new form to help alleviate that issue of sellers who are on title with their legal duty to disclose, but they didn't want to fill out that full 7-page form. So there is this new form called Seller's Disclosure of Latent Defects and a Fixtures Checklist. And it is a very short and sweet form. It's only 2 pages long. And it does say that the seller's disclosure of latent, Georgia law requires the seller to disclose latent defects in the seller's property to the buyer of the property of which the seller is aware, and which could not be discovered by the buyer upon reasonably careful inspection of the property. A latent defect in a property is a defect that is hidden. So, for example, a defective septic system or termite damage that has been covered over have been found by our courts to be latent defects. If a defect is obvious, it does not need to be disclosed. If a defect has been corrected, it is no longer a defect. Of course, since parties can disagree over whether a defect is obvious or has been properly repaired, erring on the side of disclosure is recommended. So then it has a place for the seller to disclose known latent defects. It has a section for an agricultural disclosure, and then it also has a fixtures checklist regarding what items a seller is leaving with the property or taking with the property. So again, this is a 2-page form designed to help a seller with that. Now, I also want to remind you that as a real estate agent, you too have a duty to disclose to a potential buyer any latent material defects with the property of which you have knowledge, even if you are directed by the seller to not disclose those. Now, I'm not talking about a stigmatized property where we're talking about infectious disease, death, murder, suicide, something like that. I'm talking about an actual material defect of the property. And per license law, and again, that would be in Title 10, Chapter 6A, 5B, 1 and 2. It talks about that a broker engaged by a seller shall timely disclose the following. The first thing is all adverse material facts pertaining to the physical condition of the property and improvements located on such property, including but not limited to material defects in the property, environmental contamination, and facts required by statute or regulation to be disclosed, which are actually known by the broker, which could not be discovered by a reasonably diligent inspection of the property by the buyer. And all material facts pertaining to existing adverse physical conditions in the immediate neighborhood within 1 mile of the property, which are actually known to the broker, and again, which could not be discovered by the buyer upon diligent inspection of the neighborhood or thorough review of reasonably available government regulations and documents, so forth and so on. So that's your duty as a licensed real estate agent in the state of Georgia. Additionally, if you are a realtor, you have an additional duty to adhere to the Realtor Code of Ethics, specifically Article 2. Article 2 states that realtors shall avoid exaggeration, misrepresentation, or concealment of pertinent facts relating to the property or the transaction. Realtors shall not, however, be obligated to discover latent defects in the property, to advise on matters outside of the scope of their real estate license, or to disclose facts which are confidential under the scope of agency or non-agency relationships as defined by state law. So again, just to bring to your attention that the seller is obligated by law, as well as you as a real estate licensee, you are obligated by license law, as well as if you are a realtor, by your duty bound by the Code of Ethics to disclose latent material defects. Material defects, the Code of Ethics goes on to say adverse material. Well, license law does too, even with the neighborhood. So I wanted to bring to your attention this new form that GAR has for that. While we're on the topic, GAR did make a few minor changes to the existing form, the GAR 301, the Seller's Property Disclosure Exhibit. They just added a few things. They added, under the section of systems and components, they added a few additional questions about replacement of some of those systems and components and the service dates. They added a question about a fill in the blank, basically about the age of the hot water heater. And they modified the question regarding termites and pests and bugs regarding any damage caused by them. And the cost of any transfer of any of those warranties. So what do you think of the new form? Check it out. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned for more on the series of changes to the 2021 Georgia Association of Realtors contract forms. Thank you so much for watching. Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, satisfying your needs with service, innovation, and education.